Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is, pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Here we are, ladies and gentlemen, on the latest edition of the 30-minute Midas Touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony, and with me this week is, of course, the missing Mulkey, Mark Tipton.
The missing Mulkey. Okay. I do appreciate these introductions. They never cease to entertain me and certainly get the show off for me, and I hope for the audience, off to a very good start with a good laugh, because ultimately we're talking about something we love and having a good time. Today, our subject is something that I want to talk about, because in our society we have things that are known as thankless jobs. And that's kind of what the subject of this is. There are people who do jobs that are necessary for the success of an organization, to keep things going and to be a part of an organization or a show, who don't really get the limelight and don't get appreciated the way they should. These people in the world of professional wrestling, they're what I would like to, in a nicer way, refer to as perhaps enhancement talent. Some people have used that term, but the more common term that I hear, even among people in the audience, and we'll get into that a little bit, as much as it dismays me, I hear the term among people in the audience from time to time, and that is, they're commonly known as jobbers. I guess for the beginning, to start on this subject, let's start with from a professional point of view, what is the true definition of jobber?
Yeah, true definition is a very good way to put it, because this is one of these things that has this. It has this huge misconception around it. Once the internet happened and once fans kind of got a hold of a word and kind of loosely based knew what it meant, they took it and made it mean something completely different, right? So the word jobber is for the guy that was on television back in the studio wrestling days, that he couldn't take a hip toss. He couldn't take a backdrop. He was horrible in every way. Maybe he just didn't have enough training, maybe whatever it was, but he couldn't do anything. And he was basically 100% just meat for whoever the star was, right? And he was fed to the stars. That's all he was. The misconception around the word jobber now is, like, we see Dolph Ziggler get beat 3 times on Monday Night Raw in a row, and then everybody online's, he's a jobber now. That's not how the term is at all. You understand? And it's completely disrespectful to Dolph, to all those guys. And there's a lot of guys over the years that have been called jobbers, and that wasn't their term. Jobbers were, like I said, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't take anything. They definitely weren't under contract. You understand? They were just there to take their ass whooping and move on. They were nameless and faceless a lot of times, and that's what a true jobber is. So when some of these other wrestlers get branded as, well, they're just a jobber, that's completely inaccurate in the history of professional wrestling. And they can try to change the meaning as much as they want, but it doesn't change the core belief of it and what it really means.
All right. I want to thank you for starting on that. You actually got into something that's a sore spot with me when this comes up, because you just referenced someone, in the case of Dolph Ziggler, you mentioned, who is a former world champion. This is, who, if we go back, once upon a time had a Money in the Bank contract, cashed it in, to one of the biggest reactions in money. I was watching it live at the time, and I was just as excited and enthralled as everyone else was. And so now to see, well, now he's just this. No, he's not just this. We've already seen what he can do. We know what kind of capability he has, and to diminish him or someone who is very talented in the ring because they're playing a different role now is very insulting to them, and I don't appreciate it when I hear it directed at a professional.
Right, absolutely. And there's been lots of guys over the years that have been, kind of pigeonholed with that term. You know, a guy like Barry Horowitz, for instance. You know, Barry Horowitz, in my opinion, is not a jobber. Did he put a lot of people over? Yes. But the thing with Barry Horowitz is, and a lot of guys we're going to talk about today, is he could go out there and he could get demolished in 3 minutes by somebody and probably give them the best 3-minute match of their career, or he could go out there and go 30 minutes with Bret Hart. It entirely depended on what the company needed of him on that particular day. You know what I mean? To me, that's a worker. So you look at Barry Horowitz, and I'm thinking to this now. I'm pretty sure that he made a living in professional wrestling for 20-plus years, you know, and as his sole income. So to say that he was nothing more than a jobber is very insulting to someone that was basically just a professional. You know, he did what was asked of him to the best of his ability. Not everyone can be Hulk Hogan. Not everyone can be Randy Savage. Not everyone can be Shawn Michaels and The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. The enhancement talent, as you say, or the job guy, or however you want to say it, all those guys served a purpose for the larger scale. You know, so when Barry Horowitz would go out and put over Bret Hart, he was doing it out of necessity, because we have to create stars. A lot of these guys are really, if you're going to give them a term, the term would be carpenters. Carpenters were terms of guys that went in and built a territory or built a guy or whatever it is. They helped build those stars.
Well, yeah, thank you for going on that, because it's one of the things about professional wrestling that it is different than anything else. And I guess what I want to stand is when I look at other areas of entertainment, let me take it out of this, or let's say even in sports. In professional basketball, every year there is an award given to the sixth man of the year. It's not the award given to the guy who's not good enough to start. It's an award given to a guy who is talented, who is a professional basketball player, who made the NBA, you know, the top 1% of the 1%, or however you want to say it. He may not be in the role of someone who is starting, but that doesn't diminish him or the role he plays or how important he can be to the team being successful. And we can say much the same thing in the world of acting. It is possible to be a lifelong supporting actor who receives Academy Awards, not the guy who was never good enough to be the lead star. And so when I see this, it frustrates me immensely. But I do understand that, and I appreciate the use of the term carpenter. I like that. The term jobber, as it's used, even among when I'm sitting in the audience, I've been at WWE events, and you know, I guess what I think of as a jobber is the guy who comes out, you know, while the lights are down with no music. It's just you come back from commercial, the lights come back up, and he's standing in the ring. Oftentimes, he may not even have his name mentioned. You're just waiting for the star to come down, and the guy does the best he can. In that case, it's someone who's not going to hit a single offensive maneuver. The match usually starts with him getting mauled into the corner, you know, and something like that. And I understand that, but that guy, he's doing a job, and that's what he's asked to do, and he's doing it as a professional. But it frustrates me when I hear people doing a vital role not being appreciated, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and we've talked about this several times on the podcast so far, but it all comes down to once WWE opened back that curtain and started telling people, hey, you know, this is all phony, this is all a show, this is all this. And I said, once people believed that all these decisions became arbitrary, then it was like, you know, your career isn't worth anything unless you main event at WrestleMania now. You understand? Like, everyone has that mentality, like you're either The Rock or you're nothing. You understand? And that's not I don't think that's a healthy way to look at our business, because obviously, like you said, these guys play a vital role in what's going on. Yes, you want to be successful. Yes, you want to be the biggest star you can be, but, you know, sometimes timing's everything. Sometimes, you know, you just don't have that level of talent to get to that point, but it doesn't mean that you're not a capable person in your profession. And that's what a lot of these guys are. You know, you talked about the guys that would come to the ring with no lights, and all of a sudden, you know, oh, in this corner, you know, whoever, right? Well, you know, there was a host of those guys that maybe they never won any matches, but like the other wrestlers recognized, you know, that they were good, and they would actually, you know, let them get stuff in and stuff like that. One of my favorites is a guy named Bob Cook. who I've actually become friends with through Facebook. Believe it or not, I think we met at Cauliflower Alley several years ago. But he was one of those guys. He was on WCW. He was trained by Boris Malenko and things like that. And he's a really good talent and actually has one of the best punches I've seen in professional wrestling. And that's what a lot of guys put over when they told me. I think Arn Anderson even just recently said something about Bob Cook on his podcast. And there's just certain guys that everyone understood, hey, these guys aren't beneath me necessarily. It's just they're not getting the same opportunities as me, but they're good. So I'm not going to go out there and just eat their lunch 100%. We're gonna shine. We're gonna have a little bit of back and forth match. Obviously, I'm the star, and I'm supposed to get the win, but we need to get him over just a little bit too.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. And mentioning the names there, I'd like to go a little more along that because I try to imagine myself if I'm just in the audience listening to us have this conversation, perhaps to help me understand what the idea of jobber versus carpenter, or in appreciating the roles that everybody has. If we I'd like to cite some examples and go over, say, and a little appreciation for this guy, for a guy who during his career often didn't get much.
Right.
And so I'd like to do that here if we could.
Sure.
Is there anyone in particular that comes to mind here?
Well, I actually have. There's one guy that I actually fell down the rabbit hole on YouTube recently, and his name's Rusty Brooks. Now, I'd seen Rusty Brooks on random stuff throughout the years, but it was just one of those things. I saw a match, and I saw he was kind of good, and I went and watched about 7 or 8, 10 of his matches, and he was really good. He was a heavy set guy. He was probably not much taller than me, but he moved like a wrestler. You understand? And he was short and he was kind of dumpy. He almost looked like Humpty Dumpty. That's kind of what he looked like. And he looked kind of older. His hair was he had a bald spot and things like that. He didn't look like he was going to be a star, but he had one of those situations where he exceeded expectations. Before the bell rings, you're looking at the guy, you're like, oh, this guy has no chance at all, right? Then all of a sudden he starts working, and you're like, oh, wow, this guy can actually go a little bit. You know what I mean? And I did some research on him. Same thing. He was trained by Boris Malenko and kind of helped with his school a little bit too. So Malenko turned out obviously a lot of good talents in general. But yeah, Brooks was probably, I'd say, about 400 pounds, but he was shorter, right? So it looked more compact too. But he could move a little bit. He could hit the ropes and bump, and he had a great punch and just selling in general.
All right. Well, you mentioned Barry Horowitz, who I remember I can see him now, famous for patting himself on the back.
I still do that to this day.
I remember that well. But he had a career in both, if memory serves, in WWE and WCW, I believe.
Yeah.
Very successful, long time. It reminded me of other people in that role. One of them would be the Brooklyn Brawler, who was around the WWF for quite some time, had a defined character. He wasn't some anonymous individual, but oftentimes might be referred to as a jobber.
Yeah, and it's one of those things he never really got a win on television. He never did this, never did that, but he became an integral part of the corporate structure of WWE, and he was basically the testing ground for a lot of guys. I actually think The Rock had his first match with WWE against the Brooklyn Brawler, and he was the benchmark of, hey, should we take a further look at this guy or should we not? You know what I mean? I think Rock had hit the double vertical, which is the guy hits the ropes, he verticals over him, and the guy hits the ropes behind him, and Rock verticals him, and they run under backwards. So double vertical, right? Rock had hit that on him, and everyone just about shit their pants because it'd been so long since they'd seen a double vertical, and especially from a guy the size of The Rock at the time, right? So, a lot of those guys they're used in that capacity. They're teachers, they're carpenters, they're there to assess other talent and see what's going. That was kind of Brawler's role, and then eventually he became behind the scenes. I think he helped with promos and just overall presentation at WWE. So, his fingerprint is on 30 years of WWE, 30, 40 years of WWE. So,
all right, certainly. Well, another name, and if we've mentioned this, I apologize, mentioned his name before, but along the same lines was Iron Mike Sharp, was someone who came to mind. Now, as I recall, he always had the large...
Canada's greatest athlete.
Yes.
Iron Mike Sharp.
And he always had
A gauntlet.
a gauntlet. Yes, thank you for the word. I was trying to think of what it was. What I always remember is that. But certainly never a guy who was going to, headline a card.
Right.
But
I'm not sure about Iron Mike's career. He was in WWE kind of late. You know what I mean? Like later in his career. So I think he may have been like on top in some of the territories up in Canada and actually did really well. But of course, he was winding down. It was time to make some money and, maybe save up for, like we talked about, for that nest egg. So, but yeah, he ended up being what, like I said, a lot of uneducated fans would call a jobber just because they probably never saw him win on television. But what he was really doing was he was building the next generation of stars, and that's what a lot of this is. It's building for the future. We're not necessarily worried about, the right here, right now in my ego. We're worried about, hey, this guy can probably draw some money in about 5 years. So let's get him some wins on television so, they can see what he can do.
all right. Well, I guess another name that I want to let you talk about there is the name of Dusty Wolf comes up. Let you speak about him a little bit. He's not someone I'm as familiar with,
Right.
but I'll let you speak about him a little bit.
I worked Dusty Wolf. Dusty ended up doing. Dusty's done a lot of things. He's kind of like when you say. I think he wrote a book and it was actually called Journeyman, like the Journeyman of professional wrestling, something like that. But yeah, that's basically what he was. He made a living in professional wrestling for many, many years. He was a enhancement talent in WWE, like we talked about. But he also, I think he played Doink after Bourne was gone and Steve Kern was doing it. I think he did some on some of the house show stuff and stuff like that. So he ended up playing the Doink character some. And then he ended up, I think he helped mold and shape a lot of the talents down in Texas, on the independent scene down there, So, like I said, I worked him and everything was fine, when we worked him. So, I mean, he's another guy that, I think they may have ate his lunch a couple times, but, like, they still let him have a little bit here and there. And he was one of the boys that rode the road. You know what I mean? They didn't treat him like, this leper. You know what I mean? These guys had respect too. Just because they weren't on the top of the card, they needed them. They needed them to build and build and build and build.
All right. Well, I had an idea to take a little bit different direction, but was there anybody else in particular you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I mean, this one's kind of half and half. Okay, so we're talking about job guys, and we're talking about, like I said, these carpenter kind of guys. Well, in the middle of that, there's guys that I think that just the wrestlers just liked. You know what I mean? And the Mulkeys from the NWA, the brother tag team, the Mulkey brothers, I think they fit that mold perfectly because, they weren't much to look at, obviously. They weren't, super impressive in the ring. They really didn't get that much offense, but man, did the fans love them. For some reason, they were everyone's favorite underdog. You know what I mean? And they would go out there and they get demolished sometimes. But this one glorious day, and I remember this vividly, this one glorious day, they wrestled a tag team called the Gladiators, a masked team called the Gladiators. And the Gladiators come out and they start beating down the Mulkeys, right? And one goes to pick one of the Mulkeys up from the apron on a body slam and bring him into the ring. Well, he goes to bring him in the ring. Well, the other Mulkey had been selling, got knocked down behind him, and he was on all fours, and he tripped over the other Mulkey, right? And then all of a sudden, 1, 2, 3, the Mulkeys win, right? And it was one of the biggest. You have to go on YouTube. I'm not sure how many views it has, but I'm sure it has a lot of views because it was one of those things. Like as a kid, like when you're watching it and you see the Mulkeys get demolished every week, then all of a sudden they get a win like that. And it didn't matter if it was against a made-up tag team that I'd never seen before and the Gladiators,
Right.
But they did it.
Well, it would almost be the Washington Generals getting a win over the Globetrotters.
Right. Yeah, something like that. If everyone hated the Globetrotters, if that was the case, because they hated it for some, the Gladiators, everyone just knew, like, oh, we hate those guys. Come on, Mulkeys. Oh, they won.
All right. Well, if you don't mind, I want to show a little bit of my West Tennessee / Memphis bias here a little bit.
Sure.
And to help illustrate what we're talking about here is I watched a little YouTube videos just trying to get ready as we were about to talk about this. And to me, to demonstrate the difference is some guys who participated regularly on Saturday morning television. For instance, one match I saw on one side of the ring was the Fabulous Ones, Dutch Mantel, and Superstar Bill Dundee.
Okay.
And the 8-man tag on the other side, as Dave Brown noted, all from parts unknown. All of these individuals from parts unknown were 4 masked men. They were a tag team called the Destroyers. another masked man named the Invader, and one called the Masked Marauder.
Right.
None of them, to me, that was the quintessential imbalance, and guys who were unidentified, all from parts unknown, just masked guys. They would be the guys that I would probably say would more fit the definition of jobber. Would that be fair?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, just like I said, it's more or less the guys that were literally, they were so bad that they had no future in wrestling. But you know what? We're gonna put them on television anyway. And we're gonna beat the hell out of them. That's what a real jobber was.
Yeah.
You know,
He's going to get no offense.
He's going to get no offense. He can't do anything anyway, so I'm really going to body slam him. I'm really going to arm drag him. I'm really going to do all these things to him. Like, okay, there's this ongoing argument in professional wrestling with the new generation and the old generation. The new generation says, "Oh, everything's fake and phony anyway, blah blah blah." Like an Irish whip. You can't really Irish whip somebody, right? That's their big thing to prove that wrestling's fake and that it's always been fake and we need to all calm down, right? Well, guys, guess what? I saw Bill Dundee legitimately Irish whip many guys on Memphis television many times. Okay, these job guys that we're talking about, when Bill was in the ring with these job guys that didn't know their head from their ass, he would legitimately shoot them into the rope, and they would stumble, fall, hit the rope, and they'd either have to fall through the rope or bounce back. And when they bounced back, he would cold cock the living hell out of them. You understand? Because what happened if he threw a working clothesline or a working punch, and the guy who wasn't good enough to know any better didn't bump or didn't do anything, didn't sell to anything, didn't make Bill Dundee look like shit, right? So he would shoot him in the rope, they would legitimately hit, they would legitimately come off, and he would legitimately clothesline them or punch them in the face, and they would have to sell.
Right.
Because it was real.
Yeah, a
right?
guy who may not have that talent for being able to do it. Or you run the risk of, well, let me just say, if a guy went down too soon.
Right.
Before they even reached and made contact and make everybody look bad.
Yeah.
I would like to kind of differentiate those anonymous figures from a series of guys in the Memphis time period. I want to say a guy like Jim Jamison.
Right.
He was a name I saw regularly on Saturday mornings. And you want to talk about the T.D. Steels, and there were a number of others. Let's think, Fridge Thompson, and there was Freezer Thompson. Excuse me. My memory is struggling. And there was a manager. Boss Winters had a tag team. I think it was Rough and Ready.
Yeah.
There were lots of guys who you weren't ever going to see highlighted at the Coliseum on Monday night. But they were guys who were, for me, a big part of Memphis wrestling.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. You need a host of those kind of guys, and that's partly what's hurting professional wrestling nowadays is that everyone thinks they're a star, so no one wants to do that job. You understand? No one wants to be that guy, but we really need it. You know, like, okay, so WWE, you know, they basically are of the mindset now, like, we hire everybody, right? And we'll just take whoever we don't believe in or whatever, and basically they'll be our enhancement guys, right? So, like, their theory is, well, if Roman Reigns beats this enhancement guy, and this enhancement guy actually looks pretty good and works pretty good and stuff like that, then it makes Roman look bigger and stronger. Okay, that's a legitimate theory, and I completely understand it. But here's the thing. Wrestling was built off selling the match, right? So what we were doing with these jobbers and enhancement talents and things like that was they were wrestling people that obviously were not in their league. They were wrestling guys that were subpar to them physically, mentally, and athletically, and professionally, right? So you would show him beating those kind of guys for 6 weeks. Then over here, you would show them another guy beating those kind of guys for 6 weeks. And then you go on television and go, well, now this guy's going to wrestle that guy. And you go, oh, yeah, I want to see that. You know what I mean? Because you built up both these guys of being actual professional wrestlers, and they had mowed through all this other talent that wasn't on their level. Now they're going to come together and see what it is, and that's what we're trying to sell. So, like I said, nowadays they're hiring guys, and these guys they look like $1 million too. You know, in some cases, the enhancement talent is in better shape than the guy that's beating them, right? So, like, where is the draw on that? Like, you understand? Like, where is the, ooh, wow, I can't wait to see that happen, right? Like, if he's already gonna go against a star, well, I've already seen him go against 4 guys that I think were pretty good, but you guys just buried them. Does that make sense?
Certainly. And right now, if I could, I'd like to slip in someone I feel is a terribly underappreciated person who older wrestling fans will remember from the classic is known as 605. You'll see lots of references to 605 on the Superstation. For me, it was 505 because of where I live. But routinely on the Superstation on Saturday afternoons, I would see in particular an individual who was known as and introduced as the Alabama Junior Heavyweight Champion, Mike Jackson. And I would see him week after week get into the ring with the top talent of WCW at the time, and certainly more than hold his own. But he was never going to be the guy at the Omni, build into the big match at the Omni. He was a guy who I felt was really underappreciated, and I'll let you talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I know Mike. I haven't seen him in years, but we worked several shows together, and he's still amazing. And that's even back then. Like we talk about this now. Like, okay, Mike was in charge of bringing these enhancement guys in, right? So like, what would happen was Mike would book these guys, and then like say Mike was in a tag match against Arn and Tully, right? Well, Mike would get in there first, and Arn and Tully would work with him, and he's good. I mean, Mike's always been good, right? So he would get in there, and he would have these really good shine things with Tully and Arn. Then he'd tag the other guy, and the other guy would get demolished and beat, right? But like they always respected Mike, and he always got a lot in. I mean, even him and Flair, him and Flair would go back and forth all the time. Like you watch that kind of stuff. I heard George South. That's another guy. George South is another guy like that. But I heard George South one time say that Flair would basically walk up to him and say, "Okay, you're Steamboat today, brother," and like they would go out there and just work. You know what I mean? Because they knew these guys were good. It was just, okay, they're enhancement guys, but they're still good. We're going to go out there and put on a show, that kind of thing. But Mike, the first time I saw Mike live, he Matt Riviera had booked him, and Mike was probably early 60s at this point, right? I'm going to guess early 60s. And he went out there and he had a junior heavyweight match with a kid that was 20, and he was doing topes and dives. He did the Undertaker, the Undertaker old school. Well, he got the guy by the hand, right? And he strutted down the top rope. Mike did. Right? And then jumped off and arm dragged the guy, right? And it was like, what did I just watch, right? And Mike was actually just recently on Impact. He's 70-something now, and he went on Impact and had a match, and it was a good match, a 70-year-old guy, and he's still out there going, you know what I mean? And like, it's just, like I said, when someone can work, they can work. Sometimes they don't get the opportunities to be, like we said, headline WrestleMania, Madison Square Garden, World Heavyweight Champion, whatever it may be, but it doesn't mean that their careers are worthless by any means. These guys are very talented people. You can learn a lot from them in a lot of cases, and, like I love Mike Jackson, and I love Bob Cook, and I love Rusty Brooks, and I love a lot of these guys, and I'll go search their matches just to watch that, see how they dealt with some stuff, So yeah, it's always fun to watch those guys.
All right. I know time's probably drawing short here. I guess we're pretty close. I guess if I could sneak in one last thing, this is really out of left field, but I want to see what you thought about one of the things that happened. Now, this was I guess it was in the 90s, more or less, but we had the advent, I believe it started in ECW, and that was the Job Squad. When that came out, do you think that led into this misperception? It kind of capitalized on it and made it popular to disrespect these guys.
Yeah, I think it more or less, like you said, it capitalized on it. People were already saying those things and kind of mid-card and jobber, and like they were using these terms and, like I said, not really knowing what they actually meant. And they were trying to take them, hold them, and make them their own kind of thing. But like, yeah, I know it's very ironic. We're on a podcast talking about anything and everything professional wrestling, behind the stage and whatnot. For me to say, I don't like those terms. I don't want to hear Job Squad on television. I don't want to hear heel, babyface, sell, draw. I don't want to hear those kind of terms on a professional wrestling show. I want it, if you're going to project that this is real and this is a sport and this is, then we need to project it as such. And every time you use those terms, it completely snaps you out of your suspension of disbelief, and you're sit there, going, oh yeah, I forgot, I'm just watching a show.
Yeah, thank you just for getting on there a little bit because I just remember, well, I guess cringe is the right word to say, when I would see guys, and I believe they even wear these T-shirts into the ring. They would wear Job Squad 1, 2, 3, and on the back it would say "Pin me, pay me,"
Yeah.
which was so
Cringy.
yeah,
Right?
and
Well, even now, like a big thing now is hashtag heel. Like Ziggler did that stuff too, and it's like who? No, just and that's the thing. Like heels don't know that they're heels. Heels think that they're in the right. You know what I mean? They don't know that they're bad guys. They're supposed to be like, they're the victims in all this. You understand? And no one's on their side. But no one gets that part of it.
well, I guess just to wrap up, basically we want to express our appreciation, and I will personally express my appreciation as a member of the audience for the role these guys play.
Absolutely, and like I said, a lot of these guys, search them out. Go find them. If you guys got any of your favorite enhancement guys or guys that you feel are being unjustly categorized as jobbers, then drop me a line and let me know. But I want to thank my co-host today, the missing Mulkey, Mark Tipton. This has been the 30-minute Midas Touch. I am the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. Thank you and goodbye.